Hey everybody, and welcome to the Brute Force Academy, okay? And in today's video, what we're going to be doing is talking about React State, okay? So we're going to talk about what it is and how to use it inside of class components, okay? And then in the process of doing all that, what we're going to be doing is building this light switch game right here, okay? So I was going to tell you to wait till the end to see what happens, but I'm not good at surprises, so I'm just gonna play the game so you can see what we're gonna build. Okay. So it says press the button to begin. Okay. And the button says turn on the light. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's turn the light on. Billy, turn off that damn light. Whoa, man. Whoa. Okay. Okay, I'll turn the light off. But maybe I want to turn it on again. Let's see what happens. Billy, I'm warning yous. Oh man, we're getting a warning. Okay, maybe we should probably it's getting late. We should probably turn the light off. Let's go ahead. But maybe we would just want to turn it on one more time. He says, Billy, this is your last chance. Do not touch that light. Okay, man. Jeez, I'll turn the light off. But maybe I'll just do it one more time. Oh, lights out. Game over, Billy. I think Billy just got hit with the sandal. Okay, and this application we built using state in React. Okay, so it's just a nice little example of what you can do. You can reset the game, get hit with a sandal again, as many times as you want. Okay, so if working with state is something that you've been wanting to do and you want to hit Billy with the sandal, go ahead and stick around and we will get started. Okay, so let's get started with some basic setup. What I've done right here is I just created a folder. I called it lights out, and then I opened that folder in my VS Code window. Okay, and then once I had that open, what I did was I came into the integrated terminal and I put together a create React app by using npx space create dash react dash app space dot. Okay, and the space dot says, hey, take all the create React app template stuff that we're going to download and put it in the folder that we're already in, which is our lights out folder right here. Okay, and then what I did after that was I just went into the source folder and I deleted a bunch of stuff that we're not going to need for this tutorial. Okay, so all I have left right here is the index.js, which looks like this, and the app.js, which looks like this, and then the app.css, which looks like this. Okay, so go ahead and make sure that your files look like this right here. I just kind of fleshed everything out so we could start with a clean slate. Okay, so what we're going to do now is get set up with Google Fonts and React Bootstrap. Okay, so if you just do a quick search for Google Fonts, this first link right here should bring you to the Google Fonts page. Okay, and you can go through and select whatever font you'd like. I'm just going to go with Roboto right here. Okay, and then what you do is just go ahead and select the font weights that you'd like. I'm going to go with 100, and I think I'm also going to go with 300 right here. Okay, and then you'll get a little pane that comes out on the right. But if you accidentally close that, you can reopen it with this button at the top right here. And the reason I show you that is because I closed out of this earlier and it took me forever to figure out how to get it back. Okay, it's this button right here. Okay, so we have two options of bringing this Google font into our project. We can take this link right here and we could paste it into our HTML file inside of our public folder, right there in the head tag. Just paste it in here like you would a regular HTML project, or you could import it directly into your CSS file. And personally, I'm going to choose the latter option because it just kind of makes sense that the place that we are using the font family is the place that we're actually importing that font. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I will copy this import statement right here. All right, and then inside of my app.css, I'll just paste that import statement there, and then let me just go ahead and write a rule of .app. Okay, and then we will give this app a CSS rule and say, hey, your font family is going to be this Roboto style that we just imported. Okay, so we'll just paste that in there. Okay, and now if we start our app, okay, we should see that we do not have our Roboto font right there. Okay, and the reason for that is that I am not importing this CSS file. So let me import ./app.css. Okay, and then you'll notice that what I did was I gave a class name of .app, which I'm not actually using anywhere. So let me give this a class name of app. Okay, and now we can see that we have a beautiful Roboto font right there. Okay, so that's Google Fonts. Let's get set up with Bootstrap really quick. All right, so let's get set up with React Bootstrap. Really quick, you don't actually need to use the React Bootstrap version. You could just include Bootstrap in your project by putting a CDN in your head file right here, and then you could just use Bootstrap as you normally would on your JSX elements. Okay, but if you want to do the React Bootstrap way, here it is as well. Okay, so if we just quickly search for React Bootstrap, okay, we show up at their page, and then we can go ahead and click on Get Started. Okay, so what you need to know is that there are two things that you would need to include into your project. You would need to include the React Bootstrap package and then just straight up Bootstrap, okay? And that's because the React Bootstrap components don't have all of the Bootstrap styling by default. So that's why they're telling you to install both of these right here. But I found their documentation a little bit strange because they tell you to install Bootstrap through node modules, and then what you could do is you could just import that into your index.js file like so. Okay, and then everywhere throughout your project you will have access to these Bootstrap styles. But what they tell you after that is that it's actually better to use a CDN. And the reason it's better to use a CDN, if you click on this link right here, they'll bring you to a page, and then you can read one of the advantages of using a CDN. And they basically tell you that users are able to cache these Bootstrap styles, which means if they've seen it before, they save them in memory, which would then make loading times faster, okay? And it would take less data from the user, okay? So I decided to go ahead and go with that route since I think it's a better option. They say it in the docs right here. Okay, so that means all we need to do is just install React Bootstrap. Okay, so let's go ahead and take that React Bootstrap command and paste it into our terminal right here. All right, and then what we will also do while that's loading is we'll come down here and we'll grab this CDN right here. Okay, they're telling us this is the ideal solution. And what we'll go ahead and do is just pop open our index.html file. And right here inside of the head, we'll just go ahead and paste that Bootstrap CDN link, okay? And I'll just tab this over, okay? And we'll give that a second to do its thing, and then we will get set up with our first component and then start talking about state. Okay, so what we're gonna do right now is we're just gonna get set up with a basic Bootstrap button. Alliteration for the win, okay? And then what we're gonna do is just write the rest of the JSX and the CSS that we need for our app. Okay, so to start off, we do have the Bootstrap CDN that we pasted into the head of our HTML file, okay, which means that we have access to Bootstrap CSS, which also means I could just do something like button dash primary right here, right? and I'll just say some nonsense right there, and this will work. This will give us a Bootstrap button, okay? But if you wanted to make use of the reusable Bootstrap React components that we are trying to get from the React Bootstrap library, okay, what we would need to do is import the component from the React Bootstrap library and then take a look at the docs to see what props we can pass to them to make them work the way we want them to work. Okay, and one quick thing to note right here is that they're telling you in the docs they want you to import the component that you want from React Bootstrap slash the name of the component, okay? Because if you take this statement down here and you just paste it into your application, right? What we're doing is we're destructuring the button component from this React Bootstrap library that we gained access to when we npm installed it, okay? But what they'll tell you in the docs is that if you just import a destructured value straight from this library right here, what they're saying is that you'll import every single component from this library, okay? And the reason that's bad is because, you know, think about mobile users that have a finite amount of data. Well, you obviously don't want to take more data from them than you have to, okay? So what they're telling you, the ideal solution is to, instead of destructuring a value from their library, just import it normally from the name of the library slash the name of the component right here. Okay, and if you're curious on what the import is for whatever component you're using, you know, you can just click on the components button, look up the component you want on the left, and then just do a quick search for import, right? They'll tell you what the syntax is, okay? So right here, they're telling us that we are going to want a button, right? Starting with a capital B because it's a React component. And then instead of giving it a class name of primary like we would in regular Bootstrap, they're just showing us that we would use this variant prop right here, okay? So if we take a look at our app, it looks like we have a light button and a dark button, okay? So that would be variant light right here and then variant dark right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so instead of using this basic Bootstrap syntax right here, what we're going to go ahead and do is just use that button that we imported. Okay, and as the docs mentioned, we want to give it a variant, okay, instead of a class name, and we'll just say variant dark, and we'll save it. And then we can see we have a black button over here with nothing showing up inside, okay? And that's because I made this a self-closing tag and I need to actually put some text inside of it. So let's make this turn on the light, okay? And then I'll save it. And then now we have a beautiful Bootstrap button, right? If I were to change this to variant light, okay, you can see, might be kind of hard to see because it's light gray there, but now we have a light grayish button, okay? So good stuff. All right, that is React Bootstrap in a nutshell. I'm sure you could read through the docs and you know, figure out how to do some more impressive stuff than just a button. Okay, but I digress. So what I'm going to do now is just code out the CSS and the JSX that we need for the rest of our app. Okay, and I'll fast forward through that and see you here when I'm done. Okay, so we have our basic structure in place right now. All I've really done was created an H1 with a class name of dialog, okay, and then I gave this button a class name of light switch, and then I gave it a variant of light, okay, so it would show up with this kind of light white / gray color. Okay, and then in terms of the CSS, all I really did was write some typography rules, a little bit of flexbox, background color, a little more typography and positioning for the H1 element, and then a little bit of typography for the button right here. Okay, so nothing too crazy, and with our basic structure in place, let's get down to what this video is all about, talking about state. Okay, so what is state in React? Well, state is just little pieces of data inside of our React application that could change, okay? And these little pieces of data, they could be a Boolean value or a true and false value. They could be a number that you could be incrementing or decrementing. It could be an array of user data if you're making a blog website, or it could be an array of product data if you're making an e-commerce website. Okay, it could be whatever you want, and the only requirement is that it just has to be something that could change as the user interacts with your application. Okay, and React gives us a way to interact with these little pieces of data. Okay, so if we take a look at our completed application right here, okay, when I click on this button right here, we can see that the background color turns from black to white. Okay, and then if we click it again, it goes from white to black. Okay, and what's going on here is that we basically wrote some React code that says, hey, when we click on this button, trigger that little piece of data from true to false or vice versa, right? And as we're doing that, we can see that our application is reacting to the piece of data changing, okay? And we heard a buzzword there. That is the name of our framework, React. It is reacting to these changes that we're making in the application, okay? Is that why they named it React? I don't know, but I think it is. I never actually Googled it, okay? So that's basically state in a nutshell. It's just little pieces of data that can change, and our application can react to those changes, okay? Okay, so there is some syntax and some concepts that we need to get familiar with. So let's dive into the examples. And remember, as with anything, just try to take it slow. I know I had a really hard time learning all these concepts and all this syntax, right? But it's a marathon, not a sprint. So just take your time, go one step at a time, okay? And if something's confusing you, just go ahead and reach out to me in the comments. I will respond, okay? Okay, so with that explanation out of the way, let's get started coding. Okay, so in order to start adding some state into our app.js class component right here, the first thing we need to do is create a constructor. Okay, so the syntax for that is the word constructor, and then we would pass in props right here, and then we would call super props. Okay, and then inside of here we would just be able to assign our state. Okay, so we could say this dot state equals an empty object, okay, because that's what state is. It's just a JavaScript object with some key value pairs, okay. And one quick note is that if you don't want to type this thing out all the time, what you can do is you can just go to the VS Code extensions and look up React, and then what you'll find is ES7, Redux, GraphQL, React Native snippets, okay, and then you would scroll down here and you can see there is a snippet called rconst, okay, that will give you a constructor with some empty state, okay. So if you have that snippet installed, what you could do here instead of typing it out by hand all the time is just called rconst, and then hit enter, and then you should have your state boilerplate right here really quick. Okay, so what is this code doing right here? Okay, well, what the constructor does is basically it's a method that runs whenever this app class right here, or this app component, is getting created. Okay, and then we pass in props as an argument, which we'll talk about in a second. But then the first thing we do within that constructor is we call the super keyword. Okay, and what this super keyword does is it calls the constructor from within the parent class, okay? And you see how we're extending this component right here, this React component class, okay, it's basically calling the React Components class constructor method, okay? So we have to call this in order to get access to the this keyword from within our constructor, okay? And then what we go ahead and do is we pass in props as an argument, okay? And that basically gives us access to this dot props from within our constructor, okay? But the weird thing is that if you don't pass props in as an argument, you would think that that means we don't have access to this dot props down here, but you would be wrong. React goes ahead and it makes sure that we have access to it anyways, okay? So I'd say the majority of people probably don't know why we have to write this. I think the majority of people are probably just used to typing rconst and then writing out their state right there, okay? But that's kind of what it does. It's just good to know, all right? So then the next thing we see inside of here is this dot state equals this empty pair of curly braces, okay? So what we're doing right here is we're saying, hey, whenever we create this component, our default state is going to be whatever key value pairs we put inside of our object right here, okay? So everything in here is the state that we have available to us, okay? So we could put whatever we want in here, and if you remember, the syntax for object is just some key value pairs, okay? So I'm trying to think of what state we need for this application right here. Well, we can see that when we press the button, okay, we are turning the light on. And then when we click it again, we turn the light off, okay? So maybe a good descriptive name for the key would be is light on, right? And then by default, we could say false, okay? So now by default, what's going to happen is that when we create this app component right here, we have access to this dot state, and then from within that object, we have a key that says, is the light on? And by default, it's set to false, okay? So let's quickly take a look at that state. What we can do is come into the render method and just console.log this, okay? And if you remember, this keyword is referring to this class right here, okay, which is really just a JavaScript object that has some key value pairs, okay, but the this keyword is going to be referring to this app component, okay. So let's go ahead and pop open our developer console and let's take a look at what we have right here. Okay, so we console.logged this, okay, and we see we have app right here. That is our component, right? So if I expand this out a little bit, we can see that we have access to a bunch of stuff right here, and one of those things is state, okay? And we can see if we expand this state object right here, there's our key value pair, okay? Is light on? It's set to false by default, okay? So similar to how we would access props by typing this dot props, we can do the same thing, but for the state values that we have, all we would have to do is say console.log this dot state, okay? And then if we save that, we can see that now we're getting our state object, is the light on, which is set to false right here, okay? If we went ahead and we added some other state in here, let's say like the number of switches, you know, kind of like the number of times we press this button right here, kind of like that. We could say the number of switches. I guess we would just initialize this to 0, right? Because when the app loads, we haven't touched the button yet. Okay, and now we can see when we save that is light on is false. That was the initial value we gave, and now here is the other state value we gave. Okay, so in terms of just creating your initial state, nothing too crazy. You just got to create a constructor, call super props, make a this.state object, and then you just start putting your key value pairs that hold your little pieces of data inside of the object, okay? And one other thing to note is that a good helpful tool to look at all this stuff besides console.logging would be the React Dev Tools, okay, which is a Chrome extension, and I believe they have it for Firefox as well, okay. But if I just take a look at React Dev Tools right here, if I just give a quick Google search to React Dev Tools, okay, I can see the Chrome extension right here. So if I just go ahead and click on it, okay, for me it says deinstaller. Why is this in Spanish? I don't know what's going on. I think I had a FedEx email and everything showed up in Spanish. Hopefully for you, it doesn't show up in Spanish, and I'm not a Spanish guru by any means, but I think deinstaller probably means like deinstall or uninstall. So for you, hopefully, if you don't have this installed, it would just say install, right? Or if you do have it installed and for some reason it's showing up in Spanish, it would say deinstaller, okay? But whenever you do installer this into your Chrome, okay, so what you can do once you have that installed is just open up your developer console, and then now there should be a new tab right here that says components, okay, and then we can see all of the components inside of our component tree. Right now all we have is an app and a button, but if we click on this app right here, okay, we can see we have some state, is light on, and a number of switches, okay. So whether you prefer to just console.log things out or you just want to come in here and take a quick peek, it'll show you all of the information you need to know about your state and your props for all of your components, okay? Real useful, real handy. All right, so the last thing we want to do right now is how about we just display some of this state on the screen, okay? Let's go with this number of switches right here, okay? So similar to how we've seen with this dot props, all we would really have to do is come down here into our return statement, okay? And if you saw the props video, we could access the props value by saying this dot props dot the name of whatever the prop is, okay? But since we're working with state, all we got to do is say this dot state dot whatever the name of the state value is, okay? So this dot state is referring to this little object right here, and what we want to show on the screen is the number of switches. So then all we got to do is say this dot state dot number of switches, okay? And then if I save that, we literally see on the screen this dot state dot number of switches, okay? So hopefully you caught that issue right there. And the issue being that in order for React to evaluate what I wrote as JavaScript and not JSX, what we need to do is just put this statement in a set of curly braces, okay? And now if I save it, I don't see anything, okay? And the reason for that being is that it looks like I'm missing a capital letter right here in my O because I camel cased this up here, okay? So the naming matters, right? Okay, so now we see this dot state dot number of switches. If I put some random state value up here called fleeb and just made it a bunch of nonsense, okay, I could access that by saying this dot state dot fleeb. Okay, really not too different from the props so far. Okay, but that's how we create some initial state in our application. Now let's get on to actually modifying it so we can make our application interactive. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so in order to modify state in React, what we need is two things. We need a trigger that could cause the state change to happen, and then we need the actual code that will do the changing of our state variables right here. Okay, so let's do the first one really quick. I guess in terms of our application right here, the trigger that would cause a state change would be the act of clicking on this button right here, okay? When we click on the button, we want the background to go from dark to light and vice versa, okay? So what we can do is we can just come into our Bootstrap button right here, and we can give this an onClick property. Okay, and this onClick property isn't anything unique to the React button component right here, you could give an onClick property to pretty much anything right here. And this onClick property is what's going to happen whenever you click on that element. Okay, so what we'll do right here is we'll just say, hey, whenever we click on this button right here, what we want to do is console.log hello. Okay, and then if I save it, I can see that I haven't clicked on this button right here, but we already saw the word hello in the console. And then if I come over here and I start clicking on it, nothing's happening. Well, what's the issue here? The issue is that when you write a function in JavaScript and then you give it a set of parentheses, that function will get called immediately. Okay, so what it looks like what we're writing here is, hey, whenever we click on this button, we want to console.log the word hello. But what's actually happening is as soon as this button renders, we're just console.logging hello. Okay, and the workaround for this is to just make this into an arrow function that will then call this console.log statement whenever it gets clicked. Okay, so if I save that and I refresh the page, I can see that we don't see hello right away, and now every time we click on the button right here, we see the word hello. Okay, so keep this idea in mind. We're going to come back to this idea later, as we'll see in some common mistakes. Okay, so that's step number one, which is setting up the event that will cause our state change. Okay, but instead of just console.logging the word hello, what we want to do is update our application state right here. Okay, so let's see how to do that. All right, so it's time to modify our state, okay? And there is one very important rule that you have to remember when it comes to modifying state, okay? And that rule is that you can never modify state directly. Okay, so what do I mean by modifying it directly? Okay, well, let's say, for example, we have this piece of state right here, number of switches, okay? It is a 0 right now. Okay, let's say, for example, we wanted to change this 0 to a 1. Well, the first thing we would have to do is get that state value that we kind of did right here by saying this.state.number of switches, okay? And that gave us a 0 that we see on the screen right here, okay? And you may be thinking, all right, so what I can do is just say this.state.number of switches equals this.state.number of switches plus 1, okay? We're saying, hey, this value right here is going to be equal to whatever it currently is plus 1, okay? And if we save that, we can see we have a 1 on the screen right here. It's kind of working the way we expect right now, but the issue is that we are directly modifying this, okay? So what's the problem with that in the first place? Well, the problem with that is that in React, you need to provide a brand new state object every time you modify the state, okay? And the reason for that is when React gets a brand new state object, what it does is it takes the new state object and it takes a look at the old state object, okay? And what it does is it figures out what is the difference between these two objects. What changed between these two things? So what it does is it figures out what the difference is between the two, and then any components on the page that are making use of that state, it will go through and re-render that. Okay, so if you don't provide it a new state object, it's not able to do its job in re-rendering the parts of the page that need to be re-rendered. Okay, so what I can do is I can demonstrate that here. If I just go ahead and I get rid of this and I take this little piece of code that I wrote, okay, and then I paste it into the onClick function, what we would expect to happen is that when we click this button, we change number of switches from a 0 to a 1. and then a 1 to a 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, but if we click this right here, nothing's happening. Okay, and the reason is because React doesn't have two state objects to compare to each other, so it doesn't know what the difference is. Okay, so that's why you can't modify state directly. It'll give React a hard time with figuring out what needs to be re-rendered on the page. Okay, so how do we give it a new state object? Well, what we have to do is we have to make use of this method called setState. Okay, so what we do is we call this .setState, and then inside of here we give it a brand new object. Okay, and it's going to take this new object and see what are the differences between this object and our old object right here. Okay, so say for example, what we want to do is we want to increment this number of switches from a 0 to a 1. Okay, well what we could do is we could just say, hey, in this new state object, what we're going to do is update this number of switches key right here, and then the value of it is going to be what it currently is plus 1. Okay, so what we can do is say this dot state, which is referring to this object right here, dot number of switches, which is referring to the value of this key right here, plus 1. Okay, and now if I save that and I come over here and I click on the button, I see it goes from a 0 to a 1, and a 1 to a 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, and the reason it's working is because now React has two different state objects to figure out what the difference is. It sees, oh hey, this changed. That means I need to re-render this little piece of JSX right here, which is making use of that state property. Okay, and one important thing to note is that whenever you call setState, what that will do is trigger a re-render of your page. Okay, so as I already mentioned like 20 times a second ago, React will just figure out what changed and then go through and just re-render just the pieces of the application that need to be re-rendered. Okay, this is part of what makes React fast. Okay, instead of re-rendering the entire page, it just re-renders what it has to. Okay, that's why people love React, because it's so fast and so performant. Okay, so that is setting state in a nutshell. But let's go ahead and talk about a few of the common problems that people typically make when it comes to modifying state. Okay, and when I say people typically make, I mean the mistakes that Aaron typically made when I was learning React. Okay, the first mistake you might see, say for example, what you want to do is change this isLightOn value from false to true. Okay, so what you would do is you would come in here and say, hey, when we click on this button, what we want to do is call this dot set state. Okay, and I have to provide a brand new state object. Here's the object, there's the curly braces. And then what I want to do is update the isLightOn property to true. Okay, and then what we'll do is go ahead and save. And you can see we're greeted with a horrible error message, okay? And it's saying maximum update depth exceeded, okay? So the reason this is happening, if you remember from our earlier example, if we just said right here, console.log derp, we would see that derp gets called immediately, not when we actually click on this button right here. Okay, so with that knowledge, and also the knowledge that I mentioned earlier that setState causes a re-render, what happens when we just say this dot setState without providing to it a callback function, what happens is that this dot setState gets called immediately, okay? Which then triggers a re-render, which then calls this dot setState again and again and again, and the life cycle continues. Okay, so the way around that is to just make sure that you are passing a callback function like so to make sure that this only runs whenever we trigger this event, which in our scenario is clicking on the button. Another common problem you might see is, say for example, you're not enjoying this inline syntax. You're thinking to yourself, hey, it's getting a little crowded in there. Let's go ahead and let's space this out a little bit. So say for example, you made a helper function called this.toggle light, right? That kind of makes sense. And then what you would do to create that helper function is, instead of putting that in line, what you would do is you would just come in here and then you would make a class function by saying the name of the function, which is toggle light. And then what you would do is you would just say this dot set state. Okay, you pass in your new state object. Let's increase the number of switches right here from this dot state dot number of switches, what it currently is, +1. Okay, so if we save that right here and then we come over and we click, an error message again. So what's happening here is that this error message is saying we cannot read the property setState of undefined. Okay, and the issue here is that the this keyword right here, it's getting confused with what it's supposed to be referring to. Okay, and the reason for that is that regular functions have access to a this keyword. Okay, so when we call this.setState, this is no longer referring to our app component. It's referring to this function right here. Okay, so we have two workarounds for this. Okay, the first one is to change the scope of the this keyword by binding this function to the class. Okay, and the way we would do that is by saying this dot toggle light equals this dot toggle light dot bind this. Sheesh. That's a lot of syntax, but now if we click on this, we can see that we're incrementing our number of switches the way we would expect. Okay. The workaround that I prefer though is just turning this into an arrow function. So if we say toggle light equals an arrow function, and then we would just copy this line right here and paste it in here. Okay, and let's just go ahead and comment this out, and we'll comment this out as well, and we'll save and refresh the page. What we can see is that it's working without this binding line right here. Okay, and the reason for that is that arrow functions do not have access to the this keyword right here. Okay, so when we say this dot set state, it's not getting tied up in the scope of the function. This is referring to our component right here, whereas the regular function syntax, it was getting stuck inside of the function itself. Okay, so you can go with whatever solution you prefer. Me personally, I like doing this one better because it's a little bit less syntax. Okay, and then the last common issue that I want to show you is how to modify your state when it's dependent on your previous state. Okay, so we have an example of that right here, right? What we want to do is take a look at what state currently is and add 1 to it, right? So if we refresh our page, we go from 0 to 1, then from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, but there's actually a problem with this. Let's say, for example, we wanted to go by 2s. The easier way would probably just be to change this 1 to a 2. But say, for example, you wanted to call setState twice right here. Go from a 0 to a 1, and then from a 1 to a 2. Okay, so if we save this right here, and we click on our button, we should expect to see a 2 right here. Okay, so let's click it. We only see a 1. What gives? We're calling setState 2 times. Okay, the issue with this is that when your new state object is dependent on your previous state, what you need to do is make use of the setState callback syntax. Okay, so what that looks like is this. We'll type this dot set state, okay, and then instead of providing to it a brand new state object right away, what we're going to do is give it a callback function. Okay, so there's the arrow function syntax, and similar to how the map keyword works, this function takes a parameter that React already knows what its value is going to be, and you can name this whatever you want. You can name it balls if you wanted to, okay, like some basketballs or some soccer balls, okay, but I'll just call it previous state, okay, because that's what that parameter refers to. Okay, so the rule is that if your new state depends on your previous state, like we were doing right here, it's better to use the previous state callback. Okay, so what we can do now is we can say, hey, we're setting state right here, and now we're providing a callback function that has access to what state used to be. Okay, and what we can do is say, hey, we're going to return a new state object right here. Okay, and we want to change the number of switches. Okay, so if we say number of switches, we can say the value of this is going to be prev state plus 1. Okay, and then if I save it, I'm seeing an object here, and that's because previous state is referring to this whole object right here. I think I forgot to drill down into the object key, which is number of switches. So if I say the number of switches is going to be previous state dot number of switches plus 1. Okay, and then I can just comment these guys out right here and save it. I can see that it's going from a 0 to a 1. Okay, and if for whatever reason I felt like doubling this up, okay, I could save it and see that since we're accessing the previous state value, now we go from a 0 to a 2 to a 4 to a 6 to an 8 to a 10. Okay, so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And I know we're dealing with a ton of new syntax and it may feel a little overwhelming, but just take your time, make a small little application, do something basic with it, build on the skills, and take the brute force method. If it's not making sense now, set a goal for yourself to implement state 100 different times in 100 different ways. I guarantee you by time number 50, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, I get it, right? The way to learn is not by coding along, but by doing something on your own, okay? This is like the training wheels right here. Once this video is over, take the training wheels off and try to do it on your own, okay? So those are some of the common gotchas, okay? Okay, we saw the maximum update depth issue, which is when you try to set state immediately, it will cause infinite re-renders, okay? We saw that if we're making a helper function and we're using the regular function syntax, this keyword will get lost in the sauce, okay? So the two solutions for that are to bind your helper function to your component inside of the constructor, or to just do away with that function's this keyword by using an arrow function. Okay, and then the final little gotcha was that if your new state is dependent upon the previous state, what you need to do is take advantage of the setState callback function that will give you access to what state was previously before you called the update. Okay, so that's basically state in a nutshell. What I'm going to do with the rest of this video is just finish coding out the rest of the app, do a little bit of conditional rendering, right? Changing the way our application looks and acts based on the state, a little bit of refactoring, and then bringing in a third-party component that we will use to hit Billy with a sandal. Okay, so if you're totally burnt out of my voice, then I guess I'll see you later. If not, for whatever reason, you can stick around and we will code out the rest of this app, all right? Okay, so the first change I want to make to my application is changing the theme based off of my isLightOn Boolean value, okay? So if the light is on or if it's true, I think what I want to do is give this a white background with some black text. And if it's off, then we'll have a black background with white text. Okay, so the first thing I would have to do is rig up my toggle light function to be able to turn this light from on to off. Okay, so the first idea you may have is maybe I'll just make a function called turn on. Okay, and that would be an arrow function, so we don't have to do the function binding in the constructor right there. And what we do is call this dot set state. Okay, and then we would pass it a brand new state object, and we would say is light on true. Okay, and then we could probably and then we could just copy that down. Except this would be for turning light off. Okay, and we can say false. Okay, and then maybe we could come up here and we could say if this dot state dot is light on. Right, we're drilling down to that property, determining if it's true or false. Okay, and I could probably come in here and say this dot turn on. Right, but as you can see, we're kind of writing a lot of code just to do one simple thing. There is a nice little shortcut that we can do that would make this a lot easier. Okay, so what we could do is we could come into this new state object that we're returning right here, and we could just come right below the number of switches, okay, and we could just add a new state value in here, okay, and what we can do is say the is light on property is going to be equal to previous state dot is light on. Okay, this will give us what it currently is, and then what we can do is we can use the bang operator right here. Okay, so this bang operator will give us the opposite of what previous state was. Okay, so if we just pop open our console and we take a look at our state inside of our React DevTools right here, if we click on this button, we can see that the state changes from false to true, and then from true to false. Okay. So that's just a nice little shorthand piece of syntax that we can use. We're accessing the previous state's value, and then we're just changing it to the opposite of what its value currently is, okay? So if it's false, we make it true. If it's true, we make it false. But now what we want to do is change the theme of our app based off of that true or false value. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is open up our app.css and get rid of this styling right here. Okay, because what we're going to do is control that based off of our state value. Okay, and what I've done next is I just created a couple of constants right here that have some key value pairs that relate to the styles that I want to apply to my React components. Okay, so one way of styling our components is inline. We can just give it a style property, okay, and then the rules of React is that when you're doing inline styles, you wouldn't want to name your CSS properties using the kebab case like we typically would in a CSS file. What we need to do is camel case them, right, with a capital first letter for the new word. Okay, so what I can do is inside of this style element right here, I can just pass lights off, that first object right here. Okay, and we can see that we have this theme right here. If I were to pass in lights on, okay, we see that the theme changes. But what we want to do is pick one of these themes based off of our true or false value right here. So what we can do is we can go ahead and create a helper function for that. Let's call this get theme, okay, because that's what it's doing. And I'm going to make this an arrow function so I don't have to bind this function to the constructor. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if this dot state dot is light on equals true, or alternatively you could go with the shorthand syntax. If you just say if this dot state dot is light on, it'll say, hey, is this a truthy value or a falsy value? Okay, so if this is true, so we'll return lights on. Otherwise, we'll just return lights off. Okay, so based on whatever our state value is, this function will return either this first set of styles or this second set of styles right here. So what we can do is we can just pass that in here, and we can call our function. We'll say this dot get theme. Okay, and now whenever we click our button, we can see that our state value is turning from true to false, and that state update is triggering a re-render, and then React is able to take a look at this style right here and figure out that it is accessing state, And based off of the state change, it will return a new object for us, okay? React is reacting to what we're doing right here. Kind of nice. Okay, and then the only other thing that we want to do right here is pretty much that same process, but for this Bootstrap button right here. Okay, so we want to change this theme from light to dark. So instead of making a function right here, what we can do is do this inline by using a ternary operator. Okay, and if you don't know what a ternary operator is, it's basically shorthand for an if-else statement. Okay, so the ternary operator has a couple of pieces of code. The first piece that we have to write is the true or false expression, right? And the true or false expression that we want to evaluate is, hey, is this piece of state right here true or false? Okay, so as we already saw, we could use the shorthand syntax for that by just typing this.state.isLightOn. Okay, and then what we have to do is type a question mark and a colon. Okay, and what you need to remember is that the space between the question mark and the colon is what happens if the previous statement is true. Okay, and then the space that comes after the colon is what happens if this statement is false. Okay, so what we're saying here is, hey, take a look at our state value is light on. If it's true, what do we want to do? I think we want to return the dark theme for this Bootstrap button. Otherwise, we'd want to return the light theme, okay? And this dark and light is just some options that we can pass to our Bootstrap button. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, so we can see what's happening is we're taking a look at this.state.isLightOn. Okay, we can see that by default, when the application loads, isLightOn is set to false. Okay, and so since this statement is false right here, the variant that we end up using is light right here. All right, and then when we click on our button, we can see our state changes from false to true. Okay, and then React is able to tell, hey, this little piece of code is dependent on our state. Okay, and state changed. So let's go ahead and re-evaluate what we're putting right here. This.state.isLightOn. It's true, as we can see over here on our dev tool. Okay, so what happens now is that the space after the question mark gets returned. This dark theme gets applied to the variant prop right here. Okay, so two different ways of doing it. You can make a helper function, or you can make use of the ternary syntax. I know the ternary syntax used to confuse the crap out of me, but as with anything, all that means is that you need to do it more times until you can just read this out like plain English. Okay, so now we're able to change the theme of our application based off of some state value. What we're going to do next is add the dialogue of the game, okay? The plot is beginning to thicken just a little bit. Okay, so now it's time to update the game dialogue, okay? So there's probably a million and one ways to do this. The way that I thought of is to just create a constant up here, and I called it game dialogue, and then I gave it some key value pairs. Okay, so 0 says press the button to begin, 1 says Billy, turn off that damn light. So the way I kind of thought this would work is we could keep track of how many times this light switch has been clicked, and then based off of that, we could use whatever this value is to get one of the values out of this game dialog object's key value pairs. Okay, so when we load the game, obviously we have not clicked the light switch yet, so the number of switches is 0. Okay, and then we just use this key to access this right here, and then so on and so forth. Okay, so you'll kind of see what I'm talking about here in a second. I think the way I want to do this is I want to make a helper function. Okay, so I think what I'm going to call this is get game dialogue. Okay, so what I want to do is just say this.state.number of switches. Okay, and if I pop open my developer console, what I can do is just call this function every time we render. So let's just say get game dialog. Okay, so we can see as we click this, we go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, kind of like how we're seeing in the browser right here. Okay, we can also see it in the console. Okay, but what we can actually do with this, we can get a little creative with how we're using our state. What we can do is, instead of just console.logging that piece of state right there, what we can do is tie it in with this game dialog constant right here. Okay, so what I can do is say, I want to console.log this game dialog object, okay, and then the set of key value pairs that I want to access is going to be whatever number of switches that we're on, okay. So let's go ahead and take the number of switches right here, and let's put that into the object key, okay. So we can use the bracket notation, okay, and then I'll get rid of that first console.log statement. Okay, so let's just take a look at what we got when we load the game. The number of switches is 0, and what we're accessing right here is game dialog 0, which is basically what this is saying, okay? And what that console.logs for us is press the button to begin, okay? If I press it again, the 0 turns to a 1. So now we're accessing game dialog. This is basically a 1 right here. And then if we take a look at game dialog 1, we're getting Billy, turn off that damn light. Okay, so we can see that the dialog is progressing in the console. Now all we want to do is show that dialog on the screen. Okay, so how about, instead of just console.logging it, let's go ahead and let's remove this h1 tag down here. Let's come into this getGameDialog function, and let me just say, hey, I would like to return an h1, but instead of just putting this hard-coded value right here, what I want to do is take this game dialog text and put it right there in my h1, okay? And if I save it, I can see that I'm not getting anything at all, and that's because, for one, I haven't actually used this function anywhere. So let's go ahead and, instead of calling this function right there, let's just go ahead and come here in the JSX and then say this.getGameDialog. Okay, let's just run that. Okay, and now we're literally getting that value, and that's because I forgot to wrap this statement in a pair of curly braces. Okay, React is evaluating it as JSX, and we want to evaluate this as JavaScript. Okay, so if we take a look now, we can see it says press the button to begin. Billy, turn off that damn light. Okay, dude, chill out. So we can see that our game dialog is updating as we click here. Okay. Okay, so I don't think we need this little 8 right here. We know that this is updating. So let's go ahead and let's get rid of that. And then all we need to do right now is add in the confetti part of it, probably the best part, and then a way to reset the game. Okay, so one thing I forgot to do was to update the text of our button right here based off of the true or false value. So we can go ahead and make another helper function for that. Let's just go ahead and put it down here. Let's put get button text. Okay, and as you can see, I'm kind of naming my variables the same thing, putting them in sort of a place that makes sense. You know, the theme, the dialogue, the button. That's kind of the first thing we see. We see the theme, the dialogue, and then the button. So what I'm going to do is something very similar to the getTheme function. I'm just going to take a look at whether the light is on or off inside of our state. And instead of doing it with a if-else statement, let's do it with a ternary, like how we did down here. Okay. And obviously, I'm sure you can make this a lot more concise. I'm kind of just showing you different ways to do the same thing. Okay, so what we want to do, if you remember the ternary syntax, the first part was the true or false statement. So what we're going to do is take a look at this .state.is the light on. Okay, if it is, I think what we want to do is return a span that says turn off the light. Okay, otherwise what I want to do is return a span that says turn on the light. Okay. And we can probably make this a multi-line statement since it's getting a little crowded in here. And then instead of just showing this hard-coded text, what we can do is say this.getButtonText right here. Okay, and now we can see this is triggering from on to off. on to off. Okay, and now what we want to do is just add a way to reset the game. Okay, so what we can do right here is kind of just play through the game and find the spot where we want to reset the game. Okay, right here it says game over, lights out Billy. Okay, and if we take a look at our state right now, we want to figure out what are the conditions. Well, it looks like if the number of switches reaches 7, at this point we say game over. Okay, and I think what we'd want to do is change this text right here to just say reset game, and then we'd have to figure out a way to make it so that when we click this button again, we go back to the beginning state of the game, which is the light is off and the number of switches is 0. Okay, so we're kind of just engineering our way through this. Obviously I've already thought about this, but one way that I thought of was we could refactor this get button text function, and what we can do is just quickly take a look and see what the number of switches is, right? We can say if this dot state dot number of switches is greater than or equal to 7, how about we just do a little console.log statement, right? This sounds like the scenario that we would want to show them the reset button, okay? So how about we just test that out by saying reset game here, okay? So we can save that, go to our console, and we can get to that point in time, reset game here. Okay, so we know we have the scenario right here where we would change the text of this button right here. Okay, so that's going to be pretty similar to what we did down here. We would just return a span and then just say reset game. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just take a look and make sure that this is working. Let's go all the way to the end of the game here, and it says reset game. Now what we want to do is make it so that when we click this reset button again, we would go back to the beginning state of the game. Okay, so one way we can do that is we can just take a look at our toggle light function, right? This is the function that runs whenever we're clicking on this button right here. So what we can do for that is we can just come in here and say, hey, pretty much the same process. If this dot state dot number of switches is greater than or equal to 7, we would just console.log game needs to be reset. Okay, this is just kind of how I think about the problems. I try to think, what are my conditions? Okay, can I write an if statement to find the point in time that I need to do something, and then once I get there, I can obviously write the code in this statement right here. So let's make sure that it's working. Okay, so we got to the end of the game, and then we click one more time, and it just says game needs to be reset. Okay, all we'd really need to do is go back to the beginning state of the game. So what we can do is we could probably just copy this object right here. Okay, and then what we can do is call this dot set state. Okay, and we can pass in that new state object that we have right there. Okay, and then once we reset the state back to its initial values, I don't think we want to do any of this stuff down here. So we can kind of just short circuit this function by providing a return keyword. Okay, so if we save that and we take a look, let's see if our app is doing what we expect. Okay, let's say turn on the light, go all the way to the end, and then it says reset game. We click one more time, boom, back to the beginning, turn on the light. Okay, so I saved the best for last. Let's do the fun confetti stuff now, okay? Okay, so in order to get the confetti on the screen, all we have to do is install this nice little confetti package that we have available to us, okay? So if you read through the docs here, they'll kind of explain to you how it works. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're just going to pop open our integrated terminal right here, and then we will say npm install react-dom-confetti. React-dom-confetti. Oh, I'm so funny. it's confetti, not spaghetti. Anyways, okay. I guess it wasn't funny. Not confetti. See, that's what happens when you fuck around. React-dom-confetti is what you want to install. okay? So you could read through the docs on how it works. I was fortunate enough to find this little helpful website called react-dom-confetti. And what it does is it allows you to change the way the confetti acts based off of your settings right here. Okay, so I played around with it for longer than anybody should ever play with the React Spaghetti package, and I found some settings that I liked. Okay, so what I'll just go ahead and do is copy these over from my other code editor. You can go ahead and type all this out by hand if you want, or you can just go ahead and come to this website, play around with how you want your spaghetti to look, and then find a spaghetti that makes you happy. Okay? This is why I have no friends. Okay, so how many times can I say the spaghetti joke before it stops getting funny? Infinite amounts of time. Okay, so in order to use that package, you'll read from the docs that all we have to do is just import confetti from React DOM confetti. Why is it so funny? Okay. Jesus Christ. Okay, and then the way we go ahead and use that is we would just put it into our render method right here. Okay, and what we have to do is just say confetti, okay, and then it takes a prop called active, okay, and this is the true or false value that they evaluate that determines when should we blast the user with confetti, okay, and as we already saw, this is the state value that we want to check for. Is the number of switches greater than or equal to 7? All right, that's the point in time when we want to blast these people with some confetti, okay? So then all I need to do here is just pass in the configuration that I want, okay? So this confetti component also takes a config prop, which are the confetti settings that we copy and pasted right here, or you created from the website right here, okay? So we'll just go ahead and paste that in here, okay? And then we will save the application, okay? And don't forget to run it, npm start. Okay, and then if we play the game, let's see, press the button to begin. Billy, turn off that damn light. This guy is aggressive, okay? Billy, I'm warning you. Let's go ahead and click it again. Billy, this is your last chance. Do not touch that light. What do you think, guys? Should we call his bluff? Boom! Spaghetti! Game over. Lights out, Billy. That was React State in a nutshell, okay? So obviously, we could probably clean this code up a lot here, okay? But all you need to keep in mind is how to manage and modify state, okay? I talked about some of the gotchas. And then the rest of it is just coming up with creative ways to work with your data, okay? You can make helper functions to take a look at what your state currently is, okay? And based off of those state values, you can return different things. You can make your application look different. You can hit Billy with a sandal. You can do a ton of stuff, okay? And just keep in mind that this stuff comes with practice, okay? When I was first learning React, this stuff just seemed so hard to me because I'm a little slow, okay? But I worked on it and I put my time in. I got my hours in, and eventually all these concepts that you're trying to juggle around in your brain, eventually they make it to your long-term memory. And then once they're committed to memory, you have the ability to take these concepts that you've learned and implement them in different ways. Okay, so that is my video on basic React State. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. And then if you have any questions, please reach out. I'd love to help you out. Okay, so thank you for watching, and cheers.